Here we are, live with Mike Kesthely. Kesthely. I always kind of want to butcher your name, but I don't.
That's okay, man.
Kesthely.
However you want to say it. Kesthely's good.
Kesthely. Yeah. Always playing around with that. Real quick, guys, if you're not familiar with this guy, we were just talking before. I first got to kind of work with him back through the old OPEX kind of certification and my own personal health journey back in like 2011, 12, whatever time that was. Quick background, he's been a firefighter for 26 years now and nutrition coach for 11 years. So a lot of interesting stuff. We have a lot of shared philosophy. And then the other very cool thing about Mike is he is the co-owner, founder of Nova 3 Labs. So if you guys are anywhere in the CrossFit space, you probably saw some athletes that use these products. I've used a bunch of them over the years. We'll talk and touch on some of that. And again, I'm excited for this chat and just checking in. Mike, where are you? What's going on today? How you doing?
Good, man. I'm excellent. I'm in Lethbridge, Alberta. That's where I've been living for the past 21 years or so.
That's Canada for anyone not familiar.
Yeah, just a little stone's throw north of the Montana border. So it's a beautiful area. And just this is a regular part of my day. If I'm not at the fire hall, I'm usually in front of this computer and talking to people about nutrition. So here I am doing something I love. So.
Very cool, man. Yeah. Thank you for taking the time as always. And I want to jump into it. And I want to, we talked about some different topics that we might cover. And then in terms of the supplements that, I would say is probably the most prominent part of where I think of you anyway. And for those not familiar, some of the, products that these guys offer is max adrenal. So something to deal with when you've heard the term adrenal function. And I don't know if anything's changed on your end, if that's still a BS term or it's just a misunderstood concept, right? We go down the rabbit hole and I don't know how deep we have to get about HPA axis and all this fun stuff. But max adrenal, something that, again, at the end of the day, and the reason I always defer to Mike is we've spoken on his formulations, the fact that they've played with different, I know he's gone through this kind of very authentic process of saying, looking at research and saying, oh, like that level of ashwagandha is not good enough. Or, like, I know you're a nerd, I don't think you get offended by that term. It has some negative connotations, but again, having heard you on many different podcasts, your own podcast, and spoken with you a number of times, again, about my own health, about different things. It's just amazing to see the level of, and again, me knowing, I'll step back and say me knowing how difficult supplements are and how complicated when we talk about, again, something like ashwagandha or, rhodiola or these different herbal things, especially, the question becomes like, how do we know what the formulations are and things like that? So, and I know that Mike has put the due diligence into, finding the best formulations that are going to work for different concepts, like getting your adrenal function better and things like that. So a concept like max adrenal, max sleep, which is super interesting, a way to improve your sleep quality, which at the end of the day, Mike is a firefighter shift worker, so he doesn't have, and a lot of this came out of necessity, right? That you came up with this stuff. So
totally.
I don't know if you want to touch on some of those concepts because I'm kind of jumping all over the place.
No, for sure. Where do we even start? The supplement world is kind of like the Wild West for sure. There's not a lot of regulation. It's getting way better. There's probably more regulation within Canada than the US. And then depending how you look at it, that's good or bad. As soon as you have a lot of regulation, it can make it really difficult to formulate what you want. On the other hand, if there's no regulation, you're like, hey, cool, I can do whatever I want. And because of that, in this day and age, there's a lot of criticism towards the supplement industry, and it's totally earned. It's like people, especially consumers, they want to know what's in there. They want to know what's been tested. They want to sure there's no banned substances in there. And with that in mind, back when I first started formulating supplements, it actually happened by accident. I've told this story before, but I don't think a lot of people realize it. It's prior to Nova 3 Labs. And prior to it being called Nova 3 Labs, it was Dynamic Nutrition. And that was my company that I started way back when. And I started that reluctantly. Like I would describe myself as a very reluctant entrepreneur. I never got into this to start a business. I never got into this to professionally consult with athletes. I did this on my own for myself. It's like, hey, I want to learn as much as I can about nutrition. When I got into the whole CrossFit industry, I was a little long in the tooth. I was about 35 when I first got into it, and that was in 2007. And I thought, man, I need to do everything I can to try to be a better athlete, because competing against these guys in their 20s is really killing me. And so I started to look into nutrition. I started to look into supplementation. And a really long story short, when I started to consult with athletes, I was using a bunch of different products from a bunch of different companies. And as I was sitting around one day, I'm like, man, I wonder if I could find somebody just to make this into like one product that would just be nice and convenient for me to give to my athletes. And I got really lucky with a company that was a turnkey production company. And basically they said, yeah, we'll put this formula together for you. We'll bottle it for you. We'll design a label for you, and you can have it. And so boom, I had 75 units of the original Max Adrenal. And actually I've got the original bottle sitting on the back shelf. I don't know if you can see it. Where is it? Yeah. Just see it right.
I can see it there.
Right back there. Yeah, it's the old one. Yeah, so it's the only one left in the world. So yeah, so when I got that, I was like, oh, well, cool. That was really simple. And little did I know that it actually really isn't that simple within the supplement industry. But I got really lucky, and from there things kind of took off. And the business grew over the years, and I developed some other formulas, and all these formulas were based on what I saw my clients needed, and then what I saw really I needed, because I had trialed all this stuff on myself prior to putting a formula together. And that's the way I always did things. And so Max Adrenal is a pretty complex formula, and it's a lot of herbal adaptogens. It's got a fair amount of neurotransmitter precursors in there. And we had been talking earlier about adrenal fatigue or HPA axis dysfunction, and there's a lot of controversy about that. And I kind of get a sideways grin when I start talking about it, because, and I'm going to go off on a tangent here. Social media is amazing. It's totally amazing. The ability to connect people with one another is mind blowing. But one of the downsides is you get lots of people with lots of different opinions on there. And one of the very good things nowadays is there's lots of very well educated and experienced people jumping onto social media and talking about what they're passionate about, whether it's an endocrinologist talking about whether adrenal fatigue exists, or it could be, Susie Soccer Mom selling her skinny fat tea. I mean, it's like one extreme to the other. And so people are like, I don't know what's true anymore. And when it comes to, so adrenal fatigue is a bit of, it's an overused term for sure. And you're right, when we talk about HPA axis dysfunction, that's probably more of a correct term. And the thing is, it's really hard to measure that. It's really hard to measure that. Now, through lab testing, I can take a look and see if people, they got like reduced cortisol output, they have reduced androgens, they got reduced progesterone, reduced DHEA. And whether or not we want to give it a label of HPA axis dysfunction or adrenal fatigue, people are chronically overtrained and chronically stressed, right? And through my lab testing with athletes, I saw this. So I started to utilize different formulas, different herbal adaptogens, just as support. I'm like, okay, what's the fix to this problem? We got to reduce some stress. And that involves training, nutrition, lifestyle, right? Where do the supplements come in? The supplements come in as a Band-Aid, for sure. And they're only ever meant to be a Band-Aid solution. It's like Max Adrenal isn't going to fix your issues. It's going to help you feel better while you're trying to fix your issues. And there's a big difference with that. So when I formulated that, it was a fairly surprising success. Lots of people really liked it. Lots of people wanted it. Lots of people wanted to continually have it. When they ran out, I would get mad texts and emails, and it was never meant that way, but it turned out well. And it's obviously a staple within my life as a firefighter. So yeah. And then from there, went on to formulate a bunch of different products, and honestly, all based on need. How I was training as an athlete at the time, and which has changed to where I am now. But yeah, I mean, that's sort of a nutshell, Cole's Notes version of where the company came from. And now, I've gone through a few business partners over the years, and that's the way business goes. But I've got a really phenomenal business partner based in Canada now, and she does all the operational side of Nova, and Nova's gotten way bigger than I have, that's for sure. I'm a very small cog in a big wheel these days, and that's the way I kind of want it. So I like to do my stuff behind the scenes. So
yeah,
man.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
You were talking about the social media thing, and it's kind of relevant to our possibly some stuff we're going to talk about. But
cool.
It was a day or two ago, and I was listening to a podcast with Eric Rosa, the new owner of CrossFit.
Right.
And at the end, he actually, the guy asked him about it was on the Whoop podcast, which I'm a fan of the Whoop. I'm wearing one now. I don't know how you feel about it, or
we can talk about it.
Yeah.
It's a good topic. Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, he mentioned he's investing in a company, I think, called Wild Health, which looks at genomics, and told him that he does not do well with saturated fat. So it affected him. Bobbity bop. That I think he's investing in those guys. And again, he's for those not familiar, he's a very successful investor. Hence he was able to kind of purchase the entire brand of CrossFit. But what was funny about that was the end of the podcast. So I finished that podcast. To your point about social media, I go back to an audiobook I was listening to called Deep Medicine. I don't know if you've seen that one, but this guy, Eric Topol, I believe is the name. It's about kind of artificial intelligence in medicine, and how it can be used to read radiographs, or are we going to be able to create these algorithms that say, hey, your adrenal function is a little messed up based on these lab readings. Maybe you need some Nova 3 labs, right? But what was funny is I went right back to whatever random part of the book, and within the first minute or two of listening to it, it just totally blew my mind, because he straight up says there is absolutely no evidence to support this kind of genetic personalized diet, and the book came out a year ago, 2019. So I don't know if again these guys are onto something new, but he straight up says anybody claiming it otherwise is just trying to pull the wool over you. So bottom line is, again, to that point of social media, kind of it's there's a lot out there. It's hard to figure out what's authentic, what's not. And again, I come back to the fact that having had conversations with I trust that you've put in the time, energy, work into making sure that those formulations are good. Like, again, I even know you guys, I hope you don't mind me sharing this, but the very first whey protein I think you came out with tasted like from, not great. Would say it was very chalky, didn't have a lot going on. You guys tried to keep it clean from what I understand, but then in terms of finding a flavor that was very palatable and creating something better, from what I understand, I haven't tried the latest. There's like a sea salt version,
caramel,
caramel that one of my former clients, who's pretty good CrossFit athlete, was raving about it. I was like, oh, I'm glad they figured that one out. And again, I kind of knew they would, but I still have a little bit of chalky trauma from that first formulation.
You don't always get it right the first time. It's kind of nice when you do, but it's funny because behind the scenes, there's a lot more fails than there are successes. And that's, I'll talk about a supplement that'll be coming out, and, let's say it's January, and we might get it out by maybe December if we're lucky. And just because it goes through a lot of trial and error, and there's times when everything seems perfect. We'll get one put together and I'll do a taste test. I'll be like, this is totally horrible. Like we cannot sell this to people. So that goes on a lot behind the scenes. It's interesting about the nutrigenomics. And the DNA testing. I have a lot of thoughts on that. There was a point when I thought, and I still do, I think this is potentially the future of nutrition. And there's a reason why lots of companies are getting into this. One, because there's consumer interest. Two, because the cost of testing DNA is extremely affordable now compared to where it was 10 years ago, right?
Right. It's what I heard them say, was like $100 kind of thing now compared to probably multiples of thousands of dollars a few years ago. Yeah.
And I think the potential's there, but I very strongly believe it's not even where it should be yet. At one point in time, I was looking to get into a partnership with a DNA testing company, and I took a look, had my DNA tested, and I've had my DNA tested a number of times through different companies. I find it really interesting. And that's about where it ends. It's very interesting.
Right.
As far as the application, and implementability, I guess, if that's even a word, of what you read is it's pretty short, it's pretty minor. And I just wasn't happy with it because I just thought, would this change what I do with my clients? And I thought, no, it's not going to, right? It's not going to change what I'm doing with my clients. And in fact, it might lead them astray in some areas. So I think it's interesting. I just don't think it's there yet. That's kind of my take on it. I've run my DNA through 23andMe a couple times as they've updated, and they're probably the leader in DNA analysis. Another company will say, no, we do it better. It's all pretty standard. I end up taking my raw data from 23andMe and then I run it through Dr. Rhonda Patrick's website, Found My Fitness, and I like what she has to put out about that. And it's interesting about the saturated fat because with my DNA analysis, it comes back as, I shouldn't be eating saturated fat at all. And basically I have the genetic markers for it to affect me from a cardiovascular point of view, which is interesting because when I eat saturated fat, it tastes good. And I feel really good. And it doesn't really, at least from a self-perception point of view, it doesn't really negatively affect me. But then it's like, okay, if I continue to eat bacon like a boss for like 30 plus years, what might happen, right? Cardiovascular disease doesn't run in my family. Stroke and cerebral vascular accidents run in my family. So I'm like, maybe I'll just cut down on saturated fat a little bit. And that's about where it's at for me. So,
along those same lines, I guess. And again, you're probably up on the research on this too. How do you feel about allergy testing? Like food allergy specifically, right? Yeah.
Well, and that's something that I utilize, but I utilize it a lot less frequently than I did in the past. And it has its uses. So something like, let's say an ALCAT test or an IgG test. So I'll utilize IgG, and I use a company out of Kansas for this. And so it's immunoglobulin G. So it's measuring antibodies, IgG antibodies that your body has built against about 90 to 100 different types of foods. That's the typical test. You can have a lot of false positives with that for sure. Before I go off on a tangent, I think there's merit in it, but I think it's you got to hold it with like a critical eye. Like it's not the be all end all. Like if somebody is, let's say, having GI issues and we can't figure out what it is, there might be a use to getting tested. I've seen it where people have gotten tested, boom, boom, boom. They've seen, oh, you've got elevated antibodies to casein protein, to egg yolks, to egg whites, and gluten. Cool. Okay, let's remove those. And boom, lo and behold, you remove those. Client feels a million times better, right?
Right.
Does that mean that is standard and you have to do that test? No, you probably could have figured that out. Those are very common offenders. It's like pretty rare someone's going to have like an IgG, elevated antibodies to like peaches or something like that, right? And then they remove peaches and their world changes. Like that's pretty rare. It's usually the common dietary offenders. So it's useful, but at the same time, it's not necessary. It's pretty rare I've ever had a client where we haven't done some form of food elimination, where I've gone through their food logs, we've taken a look, we've been like, okay, let's pull this, and this, and then we get to a point of like, damn, I don't know. Okay, let's do an allergy test. I think they're valid, but they also have a lot of holes in them for sure.
Yeah.
So
go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I've had a few recent conversations with folks about, because their doctors are recommending this, and I'm just like, I'm not the biggest fan because it tends, again, especially with the traditional, if you want to call it allopathic medicine, it's just tends to be, okay, you're allergic to these things, like just eliminate them. And it's a very kind of simplified, I think, way to look at it. And again, I just don't think the science is there about the accuracy, the sensitivity, the specificity. Again, if we're going to go down the scientific side of it. So again, and I don't want to. I feel like I continue the further I get into my career, the more I want to question and challenge the mainstream and the standard kind of practice that goes on out there. And again, these are people. It's one of my wife's best friends who is asking me about allergy testing, and I'm like, I'm like, you have to do what you have to do. But if you're asking me, like, I just don't believe in it, and I think there's better ways, and I think there's again, like we can try to eliminate certain things, and we can, try to reintroduce certain things and go off of a more N=1, if you will, of experimenting on yourself in that way without, again, these expensive tests that, again, don't necessarily have that much accuracy, validity, whatever we want to call it. Yeah,
I end up testing a lot less than I used to. When I first got into it, I was like, ooh, this is cool. This is like the next level. This is what's going to create, monster athletes, and we're going to figure out stuff. And it didn't really turn out that way. And, way back when, and I have, every podcast, I always seem to have a James quote. But
he's a very quotable guy for those.
He's a very quotable guy.
For those not familiar, I'm going to say that's James Fitzgerald, founder of OPEX and formerly OPT. And he was the very first CrossFit Games champion in 2007. But he's been influential for a lot of people. Very quotable fella.
Yeah. Way back when he said, he said, I don't really do much testing. He says, normally I can just look at somebody and I can pretty much guess what their lab values are going to be. And at the time, I'm like, wow, that is like the most egotistical thing I've ever heard anyone say. And I'm like, I can't even believe this guy said that. I get it now, though. It's like after you've done a lot of testing, a client will come to you complaining of certain signs and symptoms. And you can like, oh, I bet you if I ran their labs, I'd guess what their cortisol could be. I guess what their testosterone could be. Like you can pretty much paint a pretty good picture. IgG testing, does it fall into there? I don't know. But I would agree with you. It's like the science is very limited on it. It can be useful, but there's lots of holes in it. As an interesting example, I tested, there was a set of twins I tested once, and they were former pro baseball players. They had got out of pro baseball, but they were still athletes. And they had never, ever consumed coffee. Never. They came from the Mormon culture. So they had never consumed coffee. And their mother had never consumed coffee. When I ran their IgG tests, their antibodies for coffee were like off the chart. And it's like, well, they never consume it. They've never had it. Why would they even have antibodies to it? Right. And it's like when I test myself, it's like, my antibodies for coffee are off the chart. I drink coffee every day, and I drink a lot of coffee every day. So you can have false positives for sure. Right. So anyways, labs, they're like, take them with a grain of salt, as with anything. So
definitely. Yeah. It's just, there's no perfect system. And if there was, we'd have, just like with weight loss, everyone would be on that one thing.
If
it was. And it's, there's a reason it's called like medical practice, or, whatever you want it to practice. We have to keep trying different things. And that's what I think a lot of folks keep losing on sight of is the fact that this is it's a process. It's a journey and if it's so tempting to say, like, you mentioned, and I kept wanting to jump in to say like, this sounds awesome. Like genetic testing, like we should be able to look at the thing that like our software says on, that's already written, and we can't even change what that is. So if we can see what that code is, and then we can read it, we have the key. We can say like, Mike needs to never have coffee again, or, and never have bacon again. And he's going to be the healthiest version of himself. If we could really, truly say that, that's incredible. It's going to stink that you don't have coffee and bacon, but you're going to be willing to make that sacrifice if you really know that the science and like your DNA says you shouldn't be doing that. So, and you're going to live a longer, happier life. But unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. And the same thing with this allergy testing. It's very tempting. Our lizard brains all want this like simple thing, right? And that's where I guess we can transition over to talking about the Whoop and your thoughts on that.
Ooh, yeah.
Because it's that's something where, again, it's like I want more data to tell me, am I recovered? Can I live? What things can I use to make better decisions about my health? So what's your take on all that?
What's my take on the Whoop? Yeah, so I have a Whoop. I'm not wearing it. I'm wearing an Apple Watch right now. So I have a Whoop. How do I get in it without totally bashing on Whoop? So I think Whoop's a great company. And they actually approached us, Nova, quite a few years ago, and they just said, hey, you guys have a lot of athletes. Why don't we get into some sort of partnership, and you can get your athletes these Whoops and they can have them use them. And I was like, cool, yeah, this is really awesome. I had a lot of clients using the Whoop. I was taking a look at their data. Really, without being totally long-winded on it, you can get paralysis by analysis when you take a look at data. Like people love numbers, they love data. And really what they're looking for is like the answer. What is the answer I'm looking for? Like, how much sleep am I getting? How much slow wave sleep am I getting? How much strain do I have? Where's my heart rate variability? There's value in it, but once again, I'm going to quote somebody else. I'm going to quote Dr. Andy Galpin. He absolutely I'm not going to quote him. I guess I'll just tell a story about him. He absolutely hates these devices. He hates.
Well, he was a co-author of Unplugged, I believe, with Brian McKenzie, where they basically were saying all of these devices are kind of overkill, and totally. They wrote an entire book basically not bashing, but again, like kind of warning of over utilizing these things, where we're going to get to a point of it telling you like, hey, drink some water. You should be thirsty. Instead of listening to our own body signals, basically.
Totally. So. Yeah. Biofeedback is so much. It's so relevant. And you can use them in conjunction. And a really good example would be Brent Fikowski. So he is the data god for sure. This guy has spreadsheets upon spreadsheets, even on just his sleep. On his sleep, he tracks 17 different variables for sleep. Wow. I don't think I've ever seen an athlete so dialed. It's actually fairly impressive. And he doesn't get paralysis by analysis. He's a former accountant by trade, so he's used to looking at data. And
they call him the professor.
They call him the professor for a reason. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And, he has data going back years and years and years. And when you have accumulated that much data, and let's say it hasn't caused you anxiety in the first place, because that's what a lot of this will do. It'll cause anxiety by looking at numbers. I'll in a bit, I'll tell you a personal anecdote on that. It doesn't cause anxiety. Cool. If you've got years of data accumulated, you can start to see trends, right? But the thing is, you still need to correlate those trends with your own biofeedback. And Brent's really awesome at that. He'll be like, yeah, you know what? My sleep was here. My slow wave sleep, I only got X amount of minutes. But this morning I woke up and, I didn't feel as great as I did. So that makes sense. It correlates with the data. But he might have a morning when he wakes up and he's like, yeah, you know what? I feel really good. I'm going to freaking kill it today. Right. Doesn't matter what the data says. So he's still going by biofeedback. He's not letting the data dictate how he's supposed to train. And I think that can be carried over into like, all different types of athletes, not just elite athletes, where it's like, if you wake up and you feel like you got hit by a train, regardless of what your watch says, maybe you shouldn't train. Right. And then if you wake up and you feel like $1,000,000, but your watch says, oh, your strain's too high, you shouldn't train today, you're in the red. If you feel good, train. Like, that's about how simple it should be. So I got in early on the Whoop and I started to track my sleep. So I'm pretty notorious for having some pretty nasty sleep patterns. And that has a lot to do with shift work.
Right.
And, and at the time, my sleep was really good. It's like I was sleeping solid, 8+ hours, feeling great. But every time I looked at my watch, it was like my slow wave sleep, I would get like 10 minutes. I'd get 0 minutes. And I was like, oh my God, what's going on? There's something wrong with me. I'm going to die. I'm not getting slow wave sleep. This is the most restorative sleep the person's supposed to get. Like, maybe I'm supplementing wrong. Maybe I'm over supplementing. And, I fiddled with a bunch of things and I really couldn't find a reason why my slow wave sleep was low. This circles back to genetic testing. So I'm at a predisposition to have low levels of slow wave sleep. It's just the way I'm wired, right? It really has nothing to do with my career as a shift worker. It's just the way I am. So I basically was like, okay, every morning I was looking at this and it was really wrecking my day to see how much little slow wave sleep I had. And, I got athletes saying, oh yeah, I got 120 minutes of slow wave sleep. I feel great. I was like, oh my God. So I ended up stopping tracking my sleep. I gave the Whoop to my partner, Jamie. So she started tracking her sleep and she is a hell of a lot more resilient mentally and emotionally than I am. And she's tracking. She's going through prep and she's doing her low calorie stuff and preparing for bodybuilding contests. And then one day she stops wearing it. And I'm like, hey, how come you're not wearing your Whoop? And she's like, it's kind of started messing with me. And I was like, that's interesting. Even the most resilient person. And I'm putting her on a pedestal, but she's very resilient. She was just like, yeah, I don't need to see that anymore. I know when I get good sleep and I know when I don't. And I was like, cool. And that's really what it comes down to. It's like, if you like tracking data and you're a data nerd, it can be totally useful. You need to accumulate a lot of years. So the clients that I have that use it successfully, they have years of data and they'll be like, yep, I'll have a refeed on a Tuesday. And then on Thursday, I'll notice that my strain is down.
Yeah.
Like they're able to correlate it in a delayed fashion. What's interesting, there usually is a delayed fashion, right? You'll do a brutal CNS workout on Wednesday, and then by Friday, it's like, oh yeah, okay, my strain is way up, right? Or my sleep is affected 2 nights later, kind of thing.
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah.
Right. One of the things I find most useful with the Whoop, though, that again, to some extent is super interesting, and something that I initially picked up from James Fitzgerald back in the 2011, whatever. Back then he was using Bioforce, Joel Jameson's company, for the HRV. So are you not a fan of the HRV side of it, or do you think there's not enough kind of accuracy to it?
Yeah, you know what? And I had the original Bioforce too. James got me into that.
Yeah.
And I actually couldn't use it appropriately. It's funny because at the time I had a really young child who would like wake up every morning screaming.
Yeah.
And so it was like, oh, I guess I can't take my morning heart rate.
Right.
Because it's through the roof.
For anyone not familiar, so just to give other folks a little bit. So the Whoop is constantly monitoring your heart rate. HRV is the variability. So it's how much distance or time is there between each beat. If it's 0.6 seconds between each beat, let's say, that's actually not great and is a sign that you're not well recovered and you're not prepared for the day. If you have some variability and your variability is high, so if your first beat is 0.6 and you have 1.1 and then 0.9 and then you just keep changing, that's actually a good sign. So the Whoop is constantly monitoring that, and I think it's really taking that HRV reading as it's best intended toward the end of your sleep, beginning of your waking. The old school one that we were talking about here back in 2011, as the technology was emerging, you would have to put the heart strap on as soon as you woke up, and you had to plug it into your smartphone, right? The little, did you have the little whatever sensor thing? And you had to plug it into that thing. So I remember that. And so you had to sit there and you had to lay there, I think it was 60 seconds or 3 minutes or something like that. So, and it sounds like that's something that wasn't going to happen for Mike.
No, not at the time. I ended up tracking my HRV at night, which, you know, I got to see some trends. You know, this is just me and I'm biased to it. I don't see a lot of value in it either. It's not that it's not interesting, because it is. The science behind it's really cool, but it honestly doesn't change much. It's like, and I still always go back to biofeedback. It's like, you know, just because your HRV is whacked, does that mean you're not going to train, or you're going to train differently? But I'm always like, how do you feel as an athlete? How do you feel if you want to go and crush it? And let's say, you know, every other variable is good. It's like, yeah, you're well fed, you're well watered, you know, you've gotten the sleep that you think you need. You should train, right? You know, dictating how you train on a number is like, I don't know. And I've asked other athletes this too. Sarah Scholl is a close friend of mine, and she's just like, she's like, I don't utilize any of that stuff. She's like, I don't use heart rate. I don't use anything. It's like, I use biofeedback, right? And here's somebody who's competing at the highest level and has competed for a very long time. And I'm not saying that's the right answer, but it's just, that's an answer coming right from the top. And then the flip side of that would be Fikowski, who's like measuring everything, right? So you don't need those to get to that level. Then they don't really change much. I think, you know, out of all the variables when it comes to that, I think your resting heart rate might be a very good indicator, right? That's one where it's like, if your normal morning resting heart rate is like 52 beats a minute, and you're, you know, for a week or something like that, or in a couple of days, you're waking up and you're in the 60s, then it's like, there's a change. Am I overtrained? And that's usually what it comes down to. It's like, I'm under recovered, I'm potentially overtrained. But you'll probably know that because of the things that you've done or the things you haven't done, right? So without being really long-winded, I put a much higher value on biofeedback than I would any device. That's just me.
Yeah.
So
and I'll say for those listening, again, I think Mike's coming from a much more performance-based, right? Not just pure longevity and health space mindset. So I'm going to share that actually. My wife caught COVID and then of course gave it to me. So this past week has been interesting. We're in the quarantine phase now. So seeing the HRV has been pretty interesting.
I bet.
for the data. And so in terms of long-term effects, and so that's my biggest concern now is, again, like my to your point, it kind of my normal resting heart rate, I think, is 54, something like that.
Yep.
And it's been in the 60s, 70s, even. I think it was even 77 the other day. And the respiratory rate, which is the big thing. And they've actually published some studies. I don't know if you're familiar with this, about in I think New England Journal of Medicine or JAMA, about that respiratory rate that they're tracking, which I don't even know how they track respiratory rate on here, but I trust that they're doing it right. But it's, basically what it'll show is if your respiratory rate is 15.0, that won't change for a year. It won't go up or down more than 1. You might go to 15.5, you might go to 14.8 or something like that. But, you know, when you get hit with COVID, it goes to 17.5 or something like that. And it's just, and they're just, they're able to tell that you have COVID before you even test positive for it. So interesting stuff. And then in terms of recovery, long-term as well, it's something that I'm definitely trying to figure out at this point, how to maximize that data to ensure that, because I haven't worked out since almost a week now, and I'm just like, I don't even, it's a weird feeling. My calf muscles feel like they're atrophying, and I'm like, I should probably do some squats at least or something. But
that's interesting, Bo.
So
I ended up getting COVID actually back in end of November, beginning of December, and I mean, I don't track my heart rate on a daily basis, but I mean, and it crushed me. It crushed me hard. It was like 10 days of being bedridden. And a couple of those days, it was like, I might need to go to the hospital. It was really that bad. Wow. It's interesting. Out of the 4 of us that got it, I was by far the most severe. Jamie had like super mild symptoms, like really mild. We didn't even know she had it at first. And then 2 friends of ours that are in their late 20s, they were sick, but not quite as sick as me. Like I was really crushed. But recovering from that actually was really interesting, because I felt okay until I started to do some aerobic stuff. And I remember sitting on the assault bike one day and I was spinning just like 21 miles an hour, like really easy pace. And I was looking at my heart rate. I'm like, I'm at 160 beats a minute. I'm like, this is not very cool. And then I was doing some deadlifts at one day, just trap bar deadlifts. I was doing like sets of 10, 315. And just from a personal point of view, that's not a difficult weight for me. I'm on a trap bar. And it was like my recovery between those sets was like 7 to 8 minutes because I was breathing so hard. And I was like, wow, this has actually had a significant effect. And so that was back November, December. And I've made an effort to work on some aerobic stuff on the assault bike. And I'm getting to the point now where I feel okay. And it's, you know, to think about it, I like to think that I do everything right. Like, it's like, you know, I take my curcumin, my diet's pretty dialed. I don't drink barely any alcohol. I take a lot of vitamin D, like vitamin C, zinc, all the stuff that's supposed to help your immunity. And it really crushed me hard. Right.
I'm sure, again, you mentioned your shift work and just, you know, how far behind the 8 ball that puts you, unfortunately. For those not familiar, again, listening, shift work has been categorized as I think it's type 1A carcinogen. Is that, I forget the exact class, which is basically the same as smoking, and some of the other really terrible like things that we know as, again, just like are most likely going to give you cancer, unfortunately. And so again, that's where I'm sure someone like Mike is trying everything he can to avoid the negative effects of that. But you know, that's where I'm sure, you know, that would be my simple theory, at least, wherever that's worth of probably why you got hit so hard with it. And you're unfortunately having that. And that's where, again, my thought with the Whoop is, especially now that I'm going to start recovering, and, you know, like my recovery's been in single digits for the last 5 days, 6 days. And I woke up this morning, to your point, and I felt like just like a normal night's sleep. I'm like, I feel good. And then I looked at it and it said like 6% recovery. And I'm like, mother. But I'm like, I feel pretty good. Like, you know, I'm here talking to you, like I'm having a little coffee, whatever, but like I'm ready to go into the gym and work out. But it's a question of, like, what's safe? Again, we don't know a lot at this point. The biggest concern for me, I do have history of heart disease in my family. Right. So my father actually passed away of a heart attack at 41. I'm now 37. This COVID has been linked significantly to causing inflammation and some damage to the heart. So it's a question of how much do I push it? Do I need to double up on my kind of healthy and building that aerobic base back up and making sure I do that as fast as possible? Again, like my D levels are good, C level, I take a lot of the same stuff we're talking about here, thinking I'm doing a lot of the right stuff. Again, fortunately for me, I wasn't like on the verge of having to go to hospital or anything like that. It's been like a pretty significant flu, but it's just been more than anything to me. It's been this thing telling me, hey, dude, like your physiology is not doing great. Yeah. Like the respiratory rate's kind of jumping all over the place too. So it's interesting data to say the least. It is. And it's basically quantifying, the same thing that I guess, I've experienced too, and it's I find it really fascinating. A couple of things, this is a little bit of a tangent, but a couple of things that I've implemented sort of post-COVID, regarding heart health, because it's a concern of mine. I consult on the performance side. Jamie consults on the bodybuilding side, but we're both in our 40s and I'm getting close to 50. So it's like the longevity aspect actually is a lot more interesting to me. I've implemented a higher dose of coenzyme Q10 and I've implemented citrus bergamot. So both of those have been well studied regarding cardiovascular health. And so I'm doing 200 milligrams a day of ubiquinol, not ubiquinone, ubiquinol. So it's the reduced form. And I'm doing 500 milligrams twice a day of citrus bergamot. And if I've noticed a perceptible effect, I think I've taken 100 milligrams of ubiquinol on and off for many years. And it's always been one I've been like, it's pretty pricey. I don't know. Do I need it? It's one of those things. It's like, well, they say it's good for me, so I'm just going to keep taking it. And when I don't take it, I'm like, I don't even know if I noticed anything. Since I've doubled up to 200, it's like I notice the energy levels are better, the recovery's better, everything seems to be better, right? So those are ones that are kind of staples within my supplement regime now, and that's like a longevity aspect, cardiovascular aspect. So what I'll say real quick on that, it's a really interesting, I think that's super interesting. I'm going to have to look into both of those for myself now. Yeah, man. Do it. And then I will say we were told about, I have it here. It's my wife ended up working with a functional medicine doctor in California. And then she referred us to, once we got tested positive with it, a evil chi destroyer. It's an herbal. I'm gonna grab it over here. I'll read it out to you. I'm curious your take on it. It's a silver flower. I don't know if you've ever seen that thing, and it's just a bunch of proprietary blend. It's Bicol skullcap root, bitter apricot seed, blackberry lily rhizome, cassia twig, Chinese thorax root, shuling, common. It's just a bunch of stuff. So anyway, I mean, it's not cheap. It's supposed to help mitigate long-term effects. But what I was going to say, aside from this, and if you have thoughts on that, I would love to hear that. Again, worst case, we have expensive pee is what I always say about supplements that may or may not work. But what I was going to say about all that, as you were talking, is research. So when it comes to supplements and research, the majority of research gets done on college kids, right? How often are we finding studies about firefighters who are in their 40s, who are chasing this? And for those who want to go check out Mike's Instagram, he is ripped out of his mind. He has like a 72 pack of abs. He stays very lean. So, but bottom line is there's not a lot of other specimens like that out there. When you talk about research, and when you're talking about what does CoQ10 in a reduced form of ubiquinol do for Mike or for somebody else, there's not something we can look at and say, hey, like this study showed that, in this population, it did this. So when it comes to research for supplements, especially, it's just super up in the air. You have to take it with a grain of salt, like we've said. Yeah. It depends. And my I guess closing thought on that is at the end of the day, that self-experimentation is really like, you're tracking that as much as you can yourself.
Yeah, it's really tough to find, it's getting better now out there now. So they're doing research on trained, fed athletes. And if we're looking at a supplement, we're like, hey, what's the carryover for this into the performance industry? Studies on trained, fed athletes are few and far between. We're getting more of those, right? But it's always like, we're looking at studies and it's, this is an endurance athlete study, or this is a bodybuilder study, or this is a animal-based model.
I was going to
study.
say rats is another, I didn't even mention that. A lot of studies are on rats, so
yeah, and it's like, does that have potential application to humans? It always does, but at the same time, it's like, it's always best. So this is how I look at a supplement. If I'm like considering it for myself, I'm like, okay, is there human-based trials on it? If there isn't, then I'm like, yeah, it's probably garbage. It doesn't mean it is, but it's just like, I'm going to wait on that until I try it on myself. And then if there is, what type of subjects do they use? Like you said, if it's like untrained college-age males, well, does that have application to the 40-year-old female athlete?
Right.
Probably, who knows? Maybe not. But you give a college-age male a peanut butter sandwich, he's probably going to get better. Doesn't matter what he does, right?
Right.
Untrained versus trained, there's huge application differences there. Untrained people are going to get better almost no matter what you do, right? But then athletes are going to respond differently.
Right.
But then there's like the N=1, and there's tons of value in that. People will dismiss it, but it's like, I have clients who take supplements that I don't recommend. And not that I'm like, hey, you shouldn't take that. I'm just like, no, it wouldn't be one that I would RX. But they're like, hey, I've been taking this and it works for me and I like it. I'm like, cool. If it's not going to do you any harm and it's just going to maybe empty your pocketbook a little bit, if you feel there's value for you, then by all means, for sure. You just want to make sure whatever you're taking isn't going to hurt you. As far as the is it silver flower? I haven't heard of that one. So I just quickly did a Google on it. I'm like, I can't really.
Golden flower and silver flower. I have the full. They come with these full pamphlets explaining it if you want to.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking. I did a quick Google and I'm looking at this. And when it comes to Chinese medicine, I'm like, man, that's a whole world in itself. And it's like, and you can't dismiss it either, though, because
it's been around for 5,000 years.
Yeah, right? And it's it's a lot like, and I always use this example of like bro science, right? So within the bodybuilding community, there's a lot of experimentation, and that's a huge understatement. But there's a lot of things that bodybuilders have been doing for years and years and years, and only now the science is catching up.
Right.
And as an example would be protein intake. Lots of people are like, oh my God, they eat too much protein, it's going to wreck their kidneys and do all this stuff. Well, as the science has caught up to it, it's like, hey, actually, no, it's fine for your kidneys. And actually, going above 1 gram per pound body weight actually has some very awesome application as far as body composition goes. So it's like, yes, eating more protein than you weigh actually is pretty beneficial for your body composition. And there's like some very well-controlled studies on that now. So it's like, yes, when it comes to something like Chinese medicine, would the silver flower help you post-COVID? It might. I'm actually going to look into it a little bit just to see.
I'll send you any of that info if you want.
Yeah, man, for sure.
But the question then becomes, when will Nova 3 be coming out with the like heart, max heart health or max COVID recovery formula? I think that's the next.
It might. You never know. I seem to be biased in what I formulate. So
I was going to say. So I remember when we first talked many years ago. The Max Sleep seemed to come out of the fact that there wasn't a great product on the market at the time. I won't say which other product was very prominent, and we spoke behind the scenes about what was wrong with that formulation. That was very popular at the time, but again, it was something that you said, I don't like the fact that it has this much. And again, like, I love that stuff too, hearing like what's wrong with these formulations, like, and just understanding different reactions between different herbs, different chemicals. So, and again, Mike is the guy to go to for all that. I would definitely defer on a lot of that. So he was able to break that down for me of like, I don't like this other popular kind of sleep formula because of X, Y, Z. And so it came out of necessity. Like, I think I can do better. And I think I have the knowledge base, which again, when you have that knowledge base, you said initially you were kind of locked in entrepreneur. And it's just, if you have that knowledge base, like it's almost not disrespectful, but it's a disservice if you don't share that with the world. Right. So
well, I'm glad
took us down that path of you eventually creating these formulations that hopefully again are helping a bunch of athletes out at this time. And again, I don't know. You guys don't even really market to more the general population that much, do you? Or are you starting to a little more?
Yeah, I mean, we always started to. I mean, the CrossFit bubble has always been interesting. The economic CrossFit bubble, where, lots of companies have been created from the economic buildup of CrossFit, and Nova 3 Labs is one of them, right? And to break away from the CrossFit demographic is really hard because that's where we're best known, right? And I'm best known for consulting with performance-based athletes. But I mean, a lot of the supplements obviously have carryover into the average person or the non-athlete, especially when it comes to something like an adrenal support formula or sleep formula, or something like max rehab, for not so much just acute injuries, but for like chronic inflammation, the high dose of curcumin in there. It's like, I don't market it as such, but that's like, from a personal point of view, that's something I take every day. That's something my dad, who's 77, he takes it every day. He's not an athlete, right? But the benefits of something like daily curcumin are like amazing, right? So something like that is like, it does carry over into the non-athlete for sure. But to market beyond there is like, it can be difficult, right?
Gotcha. Very cool. Very cool. All right. Well, I want to be respectful of your time, unless you want to keep going. I'm sure we can nerd out about all sorts of other stuff. But I know you're a busy human. Yeah,
man. Yeah. No, we'll have to do a part 2.
I'd love that. I'd love that. We didn't really get to the 3 directly that you sent me, but
I was just thinking that. I was like, So Bo sent me, he's like, hey, what are some topics you want to talk about? I'm like, oh man, I could talk about anything.
Yeah.
But I was like, I like talking about fueling for performance versus aesthetics. That's always a super, like, almost every client that I have, we talk about this performance versus aesthetics. It's like, people want to look good naked, but man, they want to go faster, stronger. And sometimes they're at odds with each other. And we talked about supplementation, and then, the third one kind of it's connected with the first one. It's like prioritizing goals within training, diet, and supplementation. I mean, those are big, deep rabbit holes to go down. So,
that's where I kept looking at my list of like, I'm like, I don't know. I don't know if you've seen, there's a podcast called Tangentially Speaking. It's, he wrote Sex at Dawn, I think.
I read Sex at Dawn.
Yeah. So I can't think of the guy's name right now. Sorry. But anyway, I'm always thinking, because I do it too. And I end up kind of almost inspiring, I think, a lot of my guests to go on different tangents, and we, but that's just the nature of some of these fun conversations.
Yeah, man, that's the best. It's the best.
Yeah. So again, I want to be respectful of your time, and I'd love to do another one for sure.
Totally.
And if you want to let people know best places to find you.
Yeah, we didn't actually get into all the evils of social media too much, but the best place to find me is on social media. Evil or not, that's where I am. So it'd be at Mike Elevated. So my consulting company outside of Nova is Elevated Experience Coaching. That's where Jamie and I do the vast majority of our consulting, and I still consult through Nova, but the vast majority is with Elevated Experience. So that's usually the best place. So drop me a DM, shoot me a message, make a comment, and I love answering questions. So yeah.
Lift up your chest so people can see the shirt there, because it's the shirt. Yeah, no, you don't have to lift your shirt up.
I'm just like, what? Yeah, Elevated Experience. Yeah.
And so if you are looking, we talked earlier, if you're looking for their podcast, the Elevated, the ED, that E is a 3, kind of like Nova 3 Labs. That's it there. Yes.
Elevated Project. Yeah. That's where Jamie, myself, and Christine talk about anything and everything. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm still working on my show notes flow. I haven't had a lot of people complain and or request anything there. So I'm just not taking the time to do it. If people want it though, happy to get that tightened up and cleaned up and figure out and whatever. So anyway, Mike, man, I really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Bill.
You can stay on a little bit, and we'll sign it off. And again, hope you guys got something out of it. I hope you got 1% better, or not 3% better from it. And we'll talk soon, guys.